Oh, there's Chad right there.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time, Chen. Welcome in Apex Hour. Today, we are going to talk about logging trap, and we have Nikita and Mike with us. Let me hand over them for their presentation and the session. Hand over to you.
Thanks, Amit. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Welcome to our webinar. Get some folks trickling in here. So let's get the intros out of the way here first and foremost. Um, so today we'll be presenting together with Mike. So I'm Nikita Prokopev. My background is in engineering. I was an early developer at Salesforce, spent about 9 years there working on the core platform as a full stack dev. I've probably built some features that you guys use to this day. And after my tenure at Salesforce, I spent a number of years doing consulting. Went through many different orgs, from small business orgs to large enterprises. Total of 18 years in the ecosystem, probably seen most of the things out there, done most of the things here, and currently I head up Pharos AI. And today helping me present this is Mike Fulmore. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Akita, for that introduction there, and wonderful to hear about your background. So my name is Mike Fulmore. I entered the Salesforce ecosystem in 2003, where I was an early employee, where I met Nikita as well at the mothership. I've been both internal and external software engineer, shipping products at Salesforce, and also running the elusive Org 62 as the tech lead. I later moved to Facebook and Pinterest, where I headed the tech duties for their own implementations of Salesforce. And now I am helping out Nikita and Pharos with product development.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so that makes it, 21 years in the ecosystem? That's a long time. You and I have both been at
Yes.
it for way too long. But yeah. So yeah, thanks, Mike, again. And we'll before we get started, I just wanted to throw out some things here. So Mike and I, as you can tell, probably both senior engineers. We've seen it all, we've done it all, and the topic that we're talking about today is near and dear to our hearts. We've seen login implementations at many different orgs, have participated in them, have led them, and so we kind of know a thing or two about this topic, and would love to share with you our journey, how we kind of got started, what are some of the gotchas that we've learned along the way, what are some of the things that went wrong for everybody, and hopefully that'll help you in your own journey, whether you're just starting to think about logging, or you're heads down in the project, or you're thinking about some kind of retrofit. Hopefully all these insights will help you. So by the way, we're going to be collecting your questions as we go in the chat. So please feel free to shout out anything. If you hear something and it resonates, definitely throw out your questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, so we'll definitely go through those. And yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to get out of the way real quick here, and we won't spend too much time on this, but because we're all here to talk about this, I assume there's a lot of knowledge here collectively among the folks on the bridge. But let's just spend a couple minutes on this. Why logging? Especially why logging on Salesforce? Well, logging is a crucial piece for every technology. If you've done any development outside of Salesforce, Java, Node.js, what have you, logging is sort of embedded in what you do. And if you're an engineer with that background, coming to Salesforce can be a little strange, because you really don't have the same tools that you have on these other platforms and technologies. Yet it is absolutely essential, because Salesforce out of the box is not very good at logging. You've got things like debug logs, and they're great, but they come with their own set of limitations. They're time sensitive. You have to turn them on selectively for users. You have to hunt the logs. The interface is pretty poor. They're not retained forever. They are truncated. There are certain things within them that don't show up properly. So all these problems that most of you out here are familiar with. The other thing is, Apex exception emails, you got those notifications coming from the platform, and they're useful, but it's email, right? So it's hard to manage. Oftentimes the errors are really sparse. You can't really understand what's happening. You don't have a full picture of when problems were happening and when they started, and so on and so forth. So really difficult to work with those emails. Now there are other parts of the platform that are even harder to manage and monitor. So it's things like async jobs, bulk API, email to case. All of that stuff can and does fail, and unfortunately, most people miss those errors. So we want to take matters into our own hands as engineers, and we want to build, and we want to do logging the right way. And this is why it's so appealing. It gives us a lot of flexibility. We control exactly what we log and how we log. And last but not least, they're stored for as long as we want, which is a big, big plus, because then you can go back, refer to that data. The retention is there for us, unlike with debug logs that that get purged. So they're not subject to the whims of the platform as such. Now, this is just a preface, but I'd love to get into it with some stories here. So I know, Mike, maybe you could take us on a journey when you first started doing logging in Salesforce, and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, thanks, Nikita. So I think just like a lot of folks dealing with the platform, my journey into logging was just self-preservation. I needed to figure out what was going on during a DML operation inside of an S object, and the debug statements were just truncating everything. I couldn't see all the data that I needed to see in order to understand what to process for downstream business logic. So I did what I think everybody comes to the conclusion of, and I know you'll share these stories as well, is I just saved another S object called log, and I put all of the serialized details of that object into a long text area field so that I could then inspect that at a later date.
Yeah, that's a pretty common use case for sure. My story is pretty similar. The first time I ran across this problem was I was trying to debug an integration. There was a call out, and the service all of a sudden stopped working, where there weren't any errors as such, but something was definitely going the wrong way. And I started doing system.debug to look at the payload, and of course the debug log cut off the most interesting bits. So off to the custom object, and that's how log was born for that org. And that primary use case of integration was one that kind of stuck with me throughout my career. I've seen it many times in future projects. So I'm sure all you folks out there have similar stories where you sort of first encountered that problem and solved it with logging. Please throw out your kind of first experiences. We'd love to hear about them. But now let's move on to something that that we kind of all come across when we think about logging. I mean, how are we going to implement it? What options do we have on the platform? And again, we won't spend too much time on this. There's other webinars dedicated to the topic, and plenty of resources. But just to name these things, we've got a DIY approach, which is what we build, and then we've got some open source stuff. So I'd like to talk about the DIY first, because as engineers, most of you folks out there, we love to build. And Mike, I know your experience is plentiful in this area. So could you tell me, how your DIY project went, and what it looked like?
Yeah, so just a continuation of my serialization of a simple DML operation, I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity. I could create this mechanism that we can use for our custom Apex code and LWC code and things like that, where we can log things. We can log exceptions. We could log states, right? So for going back in time and saying what state was this thing in, like how important that would be, and that would be great. So a lot of energy went into that. It was a wonderful project to start. I felt like I was adding a ton of technical value to the team and what we were going to do. So it was definitely really fun and informative project for me to like really dive in and get all these use cases I inevitably ended up just building a very simple logger, and that logger, helped us get through some crucial issues inside of our org.
That's cool. Yeah, sounds very similar to my experience. And I think these logging projects are so appealing to engineers is that you get to be kind of the product owner, the lead developer, and the end user. So you basically control the full life cycle of this, and that's something that really never happens if you think about it in our day to day. Because we build to business requirements, and then we don't end up using the stuff we build because that's for the business users to do. So this is a totally different approach, and that's why I think it's so appealing. But you know, uh, and I've encountered this myself as well. Is when you start out, you think it's really simple, but there are some gotchas in the logging world that most people don't think about until they sort of come face to face with it. So definitely a lot of technicalities. And Mike, maybe you can share like what from your side when you started your logging project. Did it evolve after that? Like, what did you have to come back to the drawing board and do some things later?
Yes, for sure. It was it's as something that started out so simple, and I thought it would be well adopted. Um, I started to get into issues where my logger was affecting current DML processes. So it was taking up resources. And so I couldn't, anything like on the account or the opportunity, anything that had a lot of custom processes going on, were they were not being able to finish because of now I'm
Right.
logging things. So that was
Yep.
like the first thing that got me.
Yeah, and then I'll share my story as well. My first problem with my logger was mixed DML. And it's just one of those things where I think the code was trying to update a user object, and I was trying to log something after that, and then of course that threw a mixed DML exception, and that's where I started to realize, okay, this isn't going to work. I need to offload this to a sink or do something else. And so yeah, it wasn't an obvious problem until I sort of ran across it. And it's really, really dangerous if you think about it, because if you rely on logs to tell you about the problem and the logs don't work because of whatever technical gotcha, that's not a great situation to be in. So yeah, and that was just the first encounter. And then of course this was in the day before platform events. So you had all sorts of scenarios where a transaction gets rolled back, your logs get rolled back. So not great. So let me just quickly summarize this. So the DIY approach, it's fun. You got full control, full flexibility. You're sort of own the entire life cycle. But on the flip side of it, there are some technical gotchas, which can be overcome, but it might take you time to kind of go through all of them. And you don't have immediate feedback with the logging as you do with other features where users tell you it doesn't work. In this case, it can sort of run for a while until you encounter these problems. So it's really important to get ahead of them as quickly as you can. And then, of course, because you've built this thing, you now own it, right? So you have to come back and revise your logging as you go, as your org evolves, as all of the things that you do, it kind of changes, right? So your logger has to change as well. And I think, Mike, you've come across this as well, right? I mean, you start with Apex, then you pretty quickly you realize, oh, I need to go into LWC and add some logging there, so that more changes to logger, and all these features that you put in are taking away the time from you building other things that are important to the business. Now, let's switch gears and talk about the open source side of things. Why build something if there's already a solution out there, right? No need to reinvent the wheel. Plenty of smart people have put their heads together and come up with great tools for us. So things like Nebula Logger, RFlib, there are plenty of these projects out there on GitHub if you just do a quick search, and they work. You've got the benefits of smart people doing the work for you. These they're trusted. They've been around in many different orgs, so they're time tested. There's a community around these things, and it's a really great way to kind of quickly get started with logging. Now, it's not all that rosy, however. what Mike, what do you think are some of the gotchas with open source tools? And I think you've got great experience to support that.
Yeah, I've looked at a lot of open source tools for Salesforce over the years, and even other platforms. I think slippery slope for Salesforce developers is definitely Node.js and their package manager platform. So things like that, and understanding open source in those contexts. So unfortunately, with the open source projects, you're going to get limited support, right? Documentation is always the last thing to think about or to do, and to write good documentation, even like setup tutorials and for YouTube Shorts or something like that. All those things tend to fall by the wayside because you have so many features to write. I've been a maintainer of a few open source projects, and of course, documentation
Hmm.
is the last thing, and
Oh
just
yeah.
overall support of the tooling. Probably one thing that really gets overlooked in the Salesforce ecosystem because of the lack of a package management tool, right? Something like Node.js has. You're importing your open source projects as source code, and you are on the hook for maintaining that source code. So
Yeah, it's really
sometimes you have to
important.
go against, or you have to go in front of architectural boards. Sometimes that code might not be up to your enterprise standards, and you may have to edit it and understand it. A lot of times, you want maybe 10% of the features of an open source project, but you're going to have to import 100% of the code to get that because there's no real easy way to just tease out the features. So you get a lot of code bloating
Yeah,
where all of a sudden you may double the size of your code base with one or two open source projects. So
yeah, yeah.
um, these things all we all forget about these types of management problems when we're using open source tooling.
Yeah, those are really good points. So let's just summarize real quick before we move on. So open source, you've got these great solutions out there that could do whatever you want. I mean, talk about Nebula. I mean, this thing is a beast. It's a Swiss Army knife. All sorts of login you want to do, it's got it. So, really good tools, time tested, loved by the community. But on the flip side, remember, you're not getting support for this. If something breaks, you're on the hook. Utilization is another one that we kind of touched on. Is like you want certain features and you like certain things in the tool, but you can't rip them out. You get in the whole thing, whether you like it or not. And then, of course, you're bringing source code into your code base that comes with its own security risks, especially true for large enterprises where you've got compliance restrictions and things like that. And it's less flexible, let's face it, right? If the library does it a certain way, you're sort of stuck in that paradigm, whether you like it or not, whether it's up to your standards or not. So these are the things that kind of keep an eye out for in the open source world. But let's say, it doesn't matter what you choose. Let's say you want to build, or let's say you pick up an open source library. Regardless, let's talk about the delivery aspects of this. And this is where, I've seen it personally. I know, Mike, you have as well. This is where people run into a lot of trouble. And I'll start with a quick story here. So this was some years ago, probably 7 or 8. I can't exactly remember at this point. But what happened was, me and my team were on a project, and we went into the Sword, and we had to develop a certain feature. And we started poking around, and we saw, oh look, there's some logging done in this area of the system. Why don't we leverage that? So we sort of started doing logging, and like, yeah, we want to follow the best practice here. And lo and behold, after a couple of days, we discovered another part of the system with its own logger. And that logger was totally different. So nothing to do with the first one. So at that point, we were just stumped, like, okay, which one do we use? What's the standard here? And we started digging a bit more, and we actually discovered a third logger. They actually had Nebula logger in there. And now, so you have an org with 3 loggers. And this is insanely confusing to any engineer. It's just, there's no standardization consistency. But this is what kind of got me thinking, what happened to this org? Why did the first logger not sort of survive? And then the second one got spawned, and then there's now an open source tool in play. How did it all go wrong so badly? So I don't know, Mike, maybe you have a similar story where you sort of started your logger, your DIY project. What happened there?
Yeah, mine was just business value was not being recognized. So I was able to bring a rough plan to this organization and say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we need to do for logging. And it was just going to encroach too much inside of our standard, release cycle management for ongoing business value. It was kind of like you'll get some of your stuff, but it'll be a month later, and that just doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So that project got shelled before it even got off the ground.
Yeah, that sounds all too familiar. It's such a hard sell for the business. You think that business would be interested in the engineering team be able to troubleshoot faster, have the right tools, but to them it doesn't look that way. To them, Salesforce is this beautiful thing that just kind of works on its own. Oh, if we have trouble, we'll get more people, or we'll figure something out. But you tell me you need to spend a month or two on building this thing out. I've got all these other things that I want you to work on. How does that work? So yeah, it's not all rosy again, um, and I've seen this happen many times. And this three logger org, I bet you that something similar happened there. Somebody started it, didn't get the blessing to sort of go ahead and finish, and then someone else came along and started it, and so on. So actually, that brings us to another point. Well, a lot of times when people talk about implementing logging, they don't realize that they actually have less time to do it than they think they do. So you might think, oh, well, I'll add logging to all my code, and that itself is a really difficult task, because now you've got to basically take the risk of updating code to add logging. So that could take a while. And you're probably not going to get a big blessing for a sort of a big bang push to do it all at once, because that could take weeks, months, and the business doesn't want you spending that much time. So you might say, well, we'll do it incrementally, right? We'll start with this part, and then we go into this part, and we kind of keep going. The problem is the keep going part. I've actually never seen a logging project carry on for longer than a few months. So however many sprints that translates to, that's the time that you have. So in reality, you may have somewhere from 2 weeks to a month to get something out there. And if you're not fully finished, chances are it's never going to get finished. So again, that three logger org, somebody started, didn't finish, someone else picked it up, didn't want to deal with the other logger, put in their own logger, kept going, and so on and so forth. So really tough spot to be in. And the other thing is, we probably all have this dark corner of the org, right? I think almost every org has that dark corner where somebody built something 10 years ago and it's sort of working, or maybe not, but nobody really wants to touch it because it's code that they don't understand. And that's a problem. You want to you're taking on the risk of modifying that code base that's been out there forever. And if you break it, you have no idea what you broke. Right? So it's really scary. And that's why, in part, these projects take so long, is that legacy code. No one really wants to deal with it. But let's talk about a different point now that I think is no less important, and that's the trouble with adoption. So I know, Mike, when you said you couldn't get the business to sort of embrace your idea, can you tell a little bit more about that? What happened there, and what about your peers? How did they receive it?
Yeah, that's a great another aspect, right? Peer adoption as well, group adoption. Who's going to use it inside your group? So one implementation of logging I had at another organization is I was able to implement Logger. I did it on my own time because I wanted to reap the benefits of having custom logging inside Salesforce. The
Hmm.
issue was my peers never adopted it. So even though I wrote rudimentary documentation, it wasn't very good documentation, but it was good enough, and I gave examples inside the code base. Um, it never saw the light of day. In fact, after about 3 years, only one implementation other than mine of custom logging did I see in the code base. So,
Wow.
so both business and these custom projects also need to be adopted by your peers as well.
Yeah, that could be really frustrating. I mean, especially when you're putting in your own personal time to do the right thing, and then you turn around and show this great thing to everybody, and everybody's like, okay. But I think there's a lot to unpack there because with getting adoption, you're making other people do more work, and unless you have a clear hierarchy in the team where you sort of got your developers, then you've got your architect, and or maybe a tech lead or something like that, and then if the tech lead tells you to do something, you do it. But when you're sort of in this flat structure, you're going to be that guy, right? That's basically telling everybody how to do it, and it's not a fun position to be in. Now, you're going to have to fight a lot of battles, and there may not necessarily be adversity, but you might run into just soft opposition, right? Just people just are going to ignore it, and that could be really, really frustrating. So the other thing I think worth talking about is how, let's say you build your logger or you get an open source one, you incorporate it in your entire code base, which is a tough thing to do, but let's say you do it. Right now, going forward, how are you going to sustain logging? Right, do you have a mature process for peer reviews where somebody looks at your code and says, hey, you didn't add logging here, you need to do that? If that is not in place, something like that is not in place, then chances are your logger is going to die over time because people are not going to be incentivized to put in logging with new functionality. So your code base is going to start moving on its own without logging, and then you'll have this part here that you've done before that has logging. So you're sort of now back to not back to square one, but you're not in a great spot again. And I know, Mike, you have a story there for that, where you've actually seen this be successful in kind of carrying logging forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to work at Facebook for a number of years, and there was a whole team there dedicated to logging, right? So logging on the Facebook platform, and you could also send logs from Salesforce into that platform. And their whole job was to maintain a logging platform. We do have a comment that Splunk
Wow.
is a good tool for logging. We're going to get to that later in the
Yes.
presentation to talk about Splunk. It is a great tool. So think of it like Facebook implemented its own version of Splunk, right? And it also, on top of that, there was the rigor of having git commit hooks, and in your actual peer review process, like Nikita pointed out, that people cared about logging and asked you to do some logging. So,
Yeah.
with the rigor, logging alone can be very beneficial and scale with the organization. But again, you have to make the investment.
Yeah, it's that's very true. I think that a lot of companies undertake this project without having that maturity level in terms of your DevOps pipeline, your SDLC, and I'm actually super impressed. Yeah, like if you've got some static analysis looking at this stuff on your commits, telling you didn't do logging, that's awesome. That right there will drive everybody to do it. And if you don't have something like that, maybe a less sophisticated version of that process, then it's really hard to keep things going. It's going to fall on you as the enthusiast, as the driving force behind it to kind of push people along. And again, you're going to be that guy, and you're going to, get pushback, and you won't have time to do it for every change that's going in. So it's pretty tough. But yeah, anyway, let's summarize. So what we talked about, getting buy-in extremely hard, especially from business folks. Now, even peer buy-in is can be challenging if you don't have the right structure within your team, and not all the engineers are on board. Um, it's very time sensitive. Chances are, if you get a blessing to do this, it's going to be a short burst, and from there you can kind of lull yourself and sort of think, oh, we'll just keep going with this initiative. You won't. I've just seen this happen so many times. That 3 logger implementation is this is kind of what drove me to that conclusion way back in the day, and I've seen it repeat many, many times over. So you have very little time to do this project actually. So, take that with a grain of salt, of course, but, definitely do take it into account in your planning. Adoption, big pain point. Peer adoption is really hard. You have to have the right supporting resources. You have to have documentation. You have to be able to do training. There needs to be that logging culture within your team and processes to make sure that this is sustainable going forward. So, all right, now let's say we implement logging and everything's awesome, right? Like we've got our code base covered, everything's there, all the logging's being done. It doesn't matter if it's a DIY or open source. Again, it doesn't matter at all. Let's say we've done it. Are we in a better spot? As the question. And I think the answer is universally yes, because you have visibility, you have that data to fall back on. But let's actually unpack this a little bit. Are we in a nirvana state? And the answer is probably, you can guess, is no. There are a few things to talk about here. So, Mike, what's the one that comes to mind first and foremost? What does logging not get us?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, with a custom logger, you have to log the things you know. Like it's almost like it has to exist in order for you to see it on a log. So you're missing the unknowns. You're trying to implement logging where you think problems are happening, and your best guess is going to get you your best logs, right? So you're only as good as your
Yeah,
best guess
yeah.
on the unknowns.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, an example of that would be governor limits, right? We all know what they are. We all know how they break stuff. All of a sudden, your execution completely halts. There's no way you're going to be able to try catch those exceptions. They're called unhandled for a reason. They are you just can't handle them, right? So it throws off your entire execution. You might get some partial logs in there, but maybe not. So these unknown scenarios are out there and they're lurking, and they will hunt you down at some point. And you might be thinking, well, I've got logging, right? That's going to cover it, but no. So that's there's a bit of a false sense of security that you can sort of fall prey to. Now, the other one that I personally observed in my career as a consultant was logging has always been thought of as sort of this developer centric initiative, right? With developers, they log in Apex, LWC, what have you. But the problem is these days on the platform, there are these things called flows. For those developers out there, yes, flows are actually working. They can do a lot. You can get a lot done with flows, and admins are taking full advantage of them. And guess what? Some orgs have more declarative automation than they have code, or they have a substantial portion of declarative automation. That drives a lot of the business processes. And chances are your code is going to interact with those flows at some point. You've got a trigger, Apex trigger, that, then sort of transitions the execution to the all launched flow on that same record. Your code will interact with these flows. And getting admins to do logging is really challenging. Now, there are some technical admins out there that sort of embrace the concept, but most admins don't. It's it's just not how it works. So a lot of times we see in logging implementations, the Apex automation is good, but flows, complete black hole. Nobody knows what's going on there. So it's important not to leave that out of the picture. Okay, now let's talk about another aspect actually that I want to throw out there. So this is a story. So we had this is an enterprise org, and they were trying to do a whole bunch of data loading, and something failed, and developer was investigating. The data didn't look right. So they went into the code, they started poking around, and they started looking at all these things. And they found that, we have a try catch here and there's a log statement. So clearly we would have seen a log if there was a problem in that area. And the issue, as it turned out, some days later, was that the logger itself had a bug. And so they were logging the problem, but the logger failed to capture it and it failed to surface it. And, this sort of false sense of security that you can sort of fall into. And and it can be really challenging to kind of get out of that mindset. You have to have, an inherent mistrust of your logging code. And a lot of people don't have that, especially, with open source tools. Less of a risk there, but still could be a problem. Now, uh, what are some of the other issues with logs, right? You've got all these logs, and you might have actually too many of them, right? Right, Mike? I think you've encountered this before, where there's just so many logs that, okay, where do I focus on?
Yeah, in fact, at Facebook and Pinterest, one of the things was we never really looked at logs because the volume of logs was too much. You just looked at trends. So when you saw bug spikes, then okay, now we got to do something. So that's like the very tip of the iceberg of starting to understand or starting to democratize this data so that everybody can benefit from it, which we're going to talk about in just a
Right.
second. And
Yeah.
so
Okay.
when in the Salesforce environment, you have a couple tools at your disposal, and that's emails and sending to Slack channels, things like that. And without the rigor involved that we're talking about, or maybe you don't have a lot of time to start to build a logical understanding of your logging, these channels tend to just get really noisy. And one thing that happens when things get noisy is you start to tune them out so that you can go about your normal day. So there's this sort of self-deprecating problem that you've encountered, and you're starting to just touch on what we'd like to kind of shift the conversation
Yeah.
towards.
Yeah.
And
So yeah,
yeah.
thanks, Mike, for sure. Yeah, hold that thought for a sec, because yeah, like, we will definitely spend a bit more time on it. I just wanted to. I saw some notes here in the chat coming through from folks. Uh, One item that is very specific to Salesforce is the potential for logging framework to be the cause of an error. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the governor limits don't turn off when you do logging. They keep going, right? So that's the other thing you got to, and I think, Mike, you pointed that out when you were running into a DML problem where all of a sudden you've exhausted the limits just by saving logs, and so the transaction couldn't proceed further. There's another comment there. Define an Apex utility to log an error, call utility and catch block. So this is a problem here with that. It's not a problem as such, but you're going to get logs captured for those error scenarios. But who goes there and looks at them on a regular basis? Right? I think the answer is sometimes, I'll go in there and look. Other times I won't. And so you kind of don't have that visibility that you would like in real time. So I've heard other people, influencers out there, and a lot of folks suggest this, like, okay, we have an error, let's log it and let's send an email to the admin, or let's be fancy, let's send a Slack message to the admin. Either way, what you're gonna see with that approach is you're gonna tune people out, and if you don't have a process for troubleshooting, then who's going to look at those emails? Are they going to act on them? Do they, are they supposed to do? These people know? Do they know to do that? It's really tricky. And then at some point, when you have too many logs coming in and everyone sends you an email or a Slack ping, you're just going to tune out. You're going to turn that off, and you're going to go back to your daily life and forget about all this stuff. And therefore, now defeating the purpose of having logs in the first place. So I think the point here to make is that this is inherently a reactive approach. So let's quickly summarize. Unknown unknowns, problems, right? Governor limits will sort of put a stop to your logging pretty quickly. Declarative automation suffers from lack of logging, by far the biggest blind spot, and that's something that is gaining a lot of traction right now. The flows are super powerful, getting utilization from admins in the ecosystem. Big part of your automation that you don't have logging for. Be wary of the false sense of security, right? Your logger can be buggy. You might think you're logging, but you can only log what you know or what you can anticipate. And the other thing that we touched on is logging is inherently reactive, right? Somebody tells you there's a problem. You go in there and take a look, and that's it. You've got better tools now to solve the problem, but you're not getting ahead of things, right? You're not looking at these issues before users report them. So inherently a reactive approach. So which leads us to our next point. What is a better approach? Is there a better approach? And of course, as you might guess, there definitely is. So it's this concept called observability that, it's actually a 19th century idea. And the thought behind it is that you can basically infer an internal state of the system by examining its external output, right? So on your car, you have a dashboard that gives you engine temperature. Let's say that temperature gauge starts to creep up. Well, that tells you that there's something going on with the engine. It's overheating, right? Is your coolant leaking? Is your engine oil at the right level? Things like that. So you could start to sort of infer what's going on with the engine by knowing that it's overheating. So that's the idea behind observability. So you sort of gather these inputs and you surface some assumptions that you could start to act on. And yeah, observability is gaining a lot of traction in the engineering world. There are lots of tools out there for other platforms, and it's a powerful concept. How unfortunately, when it comes to Salesforce, there's not a whole lot going on there, and you really only have a couple things that you could do with that. And let's go through them. So, what are some of the options? Well, the first one, I think, Mike, this is your favorite. Can you throw it out there?
Of course, build your own. So again,
Yes.
just to summarize, yeah, logging will get you so far, and building the set of observability tools around logging is really what we need to take the next step forward in understanding what's going on in our Salesforce org. So, what do you do if you're me? You go back and you convince everybody to build all these observability tools on top of the awesome logger that you've already created. So, that's one
Yeah.
option.
Yeah, that's definitely an option that most engineers think of right away, right? But if you think about it, we just talked about how hard it is to deliver logging comprehensively with the right process. And now you're basically saying, okay, we're going to need to add another layer on top of that and build more. Now that's a non-starter, unfortunately. So, what's the other option, right? Just like with logging, we've got open source tools. There are certain platforms out there that you can leverage. Unfortunately for Salesforce, the only one that we've really seen work is Grafana. Grafana is great. It's an open source observability platform. You can build all kinds of cool dashboards. You can do notifications in a smart way. You've got bug tracker integrations, things like that. So you can, preemptively get to the problem with this tool. However, it's an external tool, just like with the logging framework. Now it's also off-platform, so you're pushing data out from your org. It's really hard. It's really a complicated platform, so you have to spend time learning it, or you have to have an expert in house. And therefore adoption tends to suffer a little bit. And I think you only have 30 days with their free version, so it keeps data for 30 days, which is good, but it's not great. So open source, not a whole lot of options out there. You've got your logging library. It can do Slack notifications. That's not really observability. That's just, a mechanism that lets you maybe look at some things, but doesn't really give you what you want. Now, on the flip side, I think somebody asked that question in the chat, is Splunk. So off-platform observability, there are plenty of tools out there that work with Salesforce. Datadog, you've got Splunk, you've got New Relic. So these are, they give you that functionality of being able to set up dashboards, views, do notifications and things like that. But it's not really quite, again, it's off-platform. It's expensive. These tools are not cheap. So where we've seen this work is you're leveraging, let's say, Splunk for another part of your tech stack. Okay, well, we'll just plug in Salesforce into that, right? Another thing to keep in mind, these tools are generic. They will consume logs from all manner of systems, and they don't know Salesforce. They don't. They're not geared towards Salesforce. So you might have to spend extra time extracting the data that you need from your Salesforce logs to be meaningful to your peers, engineers, and admins. And then, the other thing, the other option is the native option. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to just show you what we mean by observability for Salesforce as we understand it. And we just kind of want to quickly go through our product because this is what we know and we understand. You don't have to use our product, but we'd like to show you what observability could look like in your org and what you get with it.
Yeah, so
And from
I would like
there,
to
yeah,
mention,
go ahead, Mike.
yeah, I'd like to mention, Pharos, Nikita, and myself, and all the engineers that work at Pharos, we've taken all of our years of experience on the Salesforce platform, all the years of having implemented logging, and we understand since we've worked in other frameworks and we've worked in places where logging to build tools, logging is essential. And us be able to build a native App Exchange app that sits inside your Salesforce that also is free forever to use if you so choose that tier, free to use forever, put in any org, and immediately you will derive value from understanding the unknowns. Pharos will start to I mean, the
Yeah.
power of it. I dropped it into an org that I had no idea what was going on. And within minutes, I saw 20 exceptions and they were grouped in a way that Nikita is going to explain to you right now. It's amazing.
Yeah, this is actually a really good point. Thanks, Mike. With logging, you have to log explicitly. With tools like ours and some other platforms out there, you can capture some of the stuff that Salesforce is already reporting to you and centralize it. And so this is an example of an Apex log, right? We got an exception email with this, and now you have this logged in a way that's easy to consume, easy to see. There's a lot of rich information here. Your flow errors, right? The stuff that's often overlooked is also captured. And you don't have to change any of your code, change any of your flows. All this just works. It's process builder. You've got, bulk API. You can do integrations. By the way, we also have our own logger called Ferris Triton. So with this approach, you can be more strategic about logging. You can look at your hotspots and then add logging where you think you don't have the right coverage. Now, the other important thing about this is, I think somebody asked this in the chat is, hey, what if we just, we've got our S object for logs. Why don't we just build some dashboards out of it? And let's see what that does, right? We get some data. You will for sure get some data out of it. But the problem is, if your logs aren't structured in the right way, in other words, they're pretty loose, you might get skewed data. You might find it hard to filter your reports and get dashboards that look good. So what our app does and other observability tools out there do as well is we group logs into issues. And so you've got the ability to see same errors under one umbrella of an issue that you can action. You can hook it up to Jira, you can use it from Salesforce. So this issue has 1,000 logs underneath it. Right? And now I can make some decisions about whether I want to fix this right now or fix this later. I've got all the data here, all the logs. I can look at the individual occurrences. I could look at the overall occurrence pattern, right? So it looks like this thing is almost happening on a daily basis. It's not impacting users, but it's impacting data. That's a high priority problem that we need to fix. Right? So just an example. And then, of course, an essential part of observability is being able to get notified in real time. And this is where a lot of the approaches fall short. Like, oh, I'll just, send an email when there's a new log. Again, that tunes people out. So what you really want is to be able to get notified on new issues. Like if it's something you haven't seen before, tell me that there's a problem now. Don't tell me 100 times, tell me once. And that's a problem that is really hard to solve. But with Pharos, it's pretty easy to do that. And, of course, again, don't have to use our app, but there are other tools that will help you with this. But we've done it specifically for Salesforce. So pretty easy to set up a Slack notification right here. Just drop in the subject, select the channel, and off you go. And you've got yourself a notification. So you can be proactive about these things. And yes, like Mike pointed out, there is a free edition. Anybody can use it for as long as they want. It'll get you lots of data. It'll get you the hotspots. And then from there, you can start to iterate on logging. okay, we have a problem in this area. Let's add more logging to it. You could be more strategic. You don't have to come to your boss and say, hey, please give me 2 months, I'll add logging. No, it can be done in a matter of hours. So, it's the new approach, and it's way, way easier now that there's tooling out there. It's way more effective than straight up logging. Is logging still important? Absolutely, but it's not. It's just a means to an end at the end of the day. So let's summarize this real quick. Logging's great. It gives you that visibility. It does not shift your approach from reactive to proactive. Logging implementations can and do go wrong many times. Seen this happen more times than I can count. So be cautious when approaching a project like that. What's a better way? A better way is to segue into observability. It's gaining a lot of traction right now in the ecosystem. Definitely jump on the bandwagon. Now, logging framework is not going to give you observability, but it lays the foundation for observability. And at the moment, to our knowledge, there's only one native solution, and that's Pharos. So that's really what we wanted to talk to you guys about today. And I think we have some questions in the chat as well. So please, guys, throw out your questions. Any stories you want to share about login implementations or anything like that. Would love to hear it, but I'll just go down the list here. Any logger framework out there which work in conjunction with Salesforce generated debug logs. Not logger framework per se, but I know there are tools out there that let you visualize debug logs. There's some Chrome plugins that you can utilize. There's a VS Code plugin that kind of makes it more visual. In terms of logging frameworks that let you create custom logs, we have our own called Pharos Triton. Nebula Logger is a great tool. RFlib, those are the ones that I'm very familiar with and I like. I don't know, Mike, you have anything else to throw out there?
No, you covered it.
All right, awesome. Let's see, what else have we got here? I believe logging is a forever improving process. You need to keep on improving with time and process along. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So thank you for acknowledging that. This is, part of what we talked about as well, is you don't stop logging, right? It's an ongoing thing. You keep changing code, you keep adding features, you need to add logging. There are new technologies that come out on the platform. You have to adapt your logger to be able to work with these new tools and technologies. It's not just Apex, right? You got to do LWC, you got to do flows, and Agentforce comes out. What's going to happen now? You're going to have AI generated code come in. Actually, that's really important for observability as well. Is if you got all these uncertainties going into your environment, these unknown unknowns, the only way to prevent against that is observability. So let's see. What else do we have?
Nikita, one thing I'd like to bring up, it wasn't in the chat, but I just thought of this, is observability just for large enterprises, right? And the answer to that is no. Yeah. Actually, think about the scenario where you have a smaller mid-size org or a smaller shop, and a problem comes in to the help desk. Maybe it's just one person at the help desk. And then that person takes that problem and then tries to get it escalated to a developer. And in that process, there's like a lot of SLA lag, right? Like you got to go and find stuff. Sometimes the problem isn't reoccurring, all sorts of stuff. And when you add observability to smaller mid-sized orgs, you actually get to democratize this information. And the person that is manning the one support queue can look into the observability tool like Pharos, and they can make sense of what is going on and inadvertently hand off like a warm lead to the third party, the developer or something like that. So it's not just a cold interaction. It actually will help speed up SLAs.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a really good point. And I think a couple of questions came up. Are you going to walk us through Pharos now? Well, I'd love to, but we don't have too much time. But I can give you a little bit of a tour here. Um, and to your point, Mike, is observability only for large orgs? It's not, because just like with everything, there are levels of observability, right? You could start small and you can iterate and you get to a better and better solution. So to give you an example, if you're a small org, maybe you got one or two people sort of managing it. All you really need is some notifications on issues. Oh, there's a new issue. Let me go look at it. Oh, let's see what happened today. Like this dashboard, right? That's built out of the box with Pharos that comes out. Oh, we have some data impact. There's a bit of user impact. Okay, let's see what's happening. These users are having trouble. Okay, let me go and talk to them. Let's find out what's going on, right? That's really all you need. And then if you start thinking on the maturity scale, okay, now we have a large team. Okay, let's start incorporating custom logging. We can use the logger that comes with Pharos or whatever you want. And then we'll start getting a process together for actioning these issues. Right. So here's my issue. I've deemed it to be high priority. I know that it's impacting data. I want to action it. I'm going to create a Jira ticket and assign it to someone. Now I have it tracked against my issue in Salesforce. There's a progress being made on the dev side on this issue. I can see that reflected here. So you getting into that on the maturity curve, you're sort of getting up there now. You establishing a process, you're going through your issues, you're triaging them, you're adding them to Sprint. And yeah, so another question is Pharos paid or free? We have paid versions, but we have a free tier that'll get you a lot of this functionality for free. It's certainly enough to get started and to keep going for as long as you want. And it comes with its own logger, which is also free. So if you want to do custom logging, like here's an example of a custom log, right? I've got a trigger, some classes, and then an error. So it's sort of similar in spirit to some of the other loggers out there. But it is then centralized together with these system errors that you get through email, your bulk API failures, all these things that are reported by the platform, but not in a way that's easily accessible. So,
Nikita, can you go back to the home screen, the home tab with the dashboards?
sure.
So these dashboards are tremendous business value, right, to business leadership. Now, as a technology supporting organization, you're able to go to these business management meetings, and just you're able to now do trend analysis over time on what's going on in your org. You'll be able to present the effectiveness of different features and what's going on, and how your org's overall status or health is. It's tremendous value to the business in this sense.
Yeah, and even
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, one question from Alan was, in the low code developers, do they have to log? And when we talk about your own custom logging solution or your off the shelf logging solution, yes, your low code developers would need to specifically log things, but not with an observability platform and not with Pharos. All low code automations are logged for you.
Yeah, if you have an error in your flow, it breaks, it'll get logged in Pharos. With traditional logging, you have to explicitly do an Apex invocable in your flow and save that log as an object explicitly. Now you could do both, and you can have the best of both worlds, and that really is kind of where the most power is at. But if there's any suggestion, is to start with the easy stuff, right? Get all of this. So all of these logs here that you see in this dashboard, I haven't changed any code. They're all just coming in from exception emails, from platform events, from things that the platform already tells you. It's just aggregated, enriched, and presented in a much better way. And you can build meaningful reports and dashboards on this. So somebody was asking, can we just do a dashboard? You can, right? And you could get a view like that, and it'd be extremely useful, because now I see a spike here. Oh, hey, what happened? Did we push out a change? Was there something that was released? So you could start kind of investigating that. But beyond that, you might struggle to get other data points, like what are the users I have that are impacted? What are the data records that are impacted? Here in Pharos, it tells you all of these things, right? Here's a PO item because it looks like a custom object. Here's, it hasn't happened in the last 6 months, this problem, so it may not be a problem at all. Here's the running user. Here are the related objects. Here's what my environment looked like at the time of error. So all these things will help you troubleshoot at a kind of a basic level. And then from there, you can iterate. You could start introducing process. You could start introducing notifications. You could start introducing more rigor, more custom logging if you want more details around hotspots. So that is really, but we believe that this is the way to go. But getting stuck in that logging mindset can be detrimental. You might spend a lot of time on the big project and not get what you want out of it at the end of the day. So that's really it. That's kind of what we wanted to talk to you guys about. Thank you for your questions. We'll go through the chat again, see if there are any more questions that we've left out. But and this will be available as a recording. So again, thanks everyone for joining. We'll stop it here. Let's see. Do we need Amit? Pause.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the joining, and thank you so much, Nikita and Mike, for such a great session. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks all.